Hi, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. I'm Upma Arora. I'm the head of communities at Padang & Co. And welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm based in Singapore, in a very thundery and rainy Singapore. And I am joined by three amazing speakers who I would introduce very shortly. But for some of you who may not know about Level 3 in Padang & Co., Padang & Co. is an open innovation consultancy. We connect startups to corporates and corporates to startup and are in a big, massive challenge of creating an ecosystem, a very collaborative ecosystem. Level 3 is a partnership with Unilever Foundry, and we have three other innovation hubs with different people. So if you want to know more about us, please feel free to connect with me, and I would love to have a conversation with you. As for today's session, I am very excited about it. It's a topic that I would like to know more, and I think all of us need to talk about it. It is around a new social contract for a digital world. As we all know, everybody's going through a digital transformation. Everybody's at a different journey in their own digital transformation. It has changed the nature of our work from model of employment to contracts, regulation. You talk about it. And with COVID-19, I think it's become far more important to understand how do we create better policies for work from home and working remotely. We've heard stories of visa issues and tax issues and things that we didn't think about before COVID, where people were stranded in different countries. So I think the whole idea about social contract has to be relooked at from every stakeholder's point of view. It's no more the responsibility of the government to just have policies. The policies have to be fed in from every stakeholder, whether it's businesses or consumers or we as employers and employees. We need to rethink and feed that into, as we all know, social contract is defined by social norms and conventions and expectations, which makes it really hard because all of this is so different in different cultures and different geographies. So just to see where the whole social contract stands in this global context, I have three amazing people who've been doing different things in this space. I've got Yusun, and I'll let them introduce themselves because I would never do justice to that. So I've got Yusun, Quinn, and Lisa. So Yusun, please introduce yourself.
Well, thanks, Upma. My name is Yusan Chu. I'm a founder and co-managing partner of Yusan Audrey. We're a specialized IP and corporate law firm based in Singapore with offices in Malaysia and Thailand as well. My areas of practice include corporate and commercial law, IP law, and technology law, with a special focus on commercialization of IP. I also advise on securities, financial regulation, relating to payment services, capital markets services, financial advisors, fintech, quite a few different things. I'm also a board member of Access, which is the Association of Cryptocurrency Enterprises and Startups in Singapore. Thank you.
Thank you. Quinn.
Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Queen, and I'm with Mero, which is a vendor for customer data platform, as a director for consulting and client services. So we do help a lot of our clients go through this, digital transformation process, and with that, really play a very key role in, educating and helping our clients balance between, the commercialization and monetization of the data assets that they have, but as well to protect and to keep the privacy, which is, the utmost important asset of data privacy for their customers. And at the same time, I also volunteer for She Loves Data, which is a nonprofit organization that aims at bringing more diversity into the tech and digital. And we can see, especially in the past couple of years also, just the pure interest of people from all walks of life in, understanding, getting their skill set upgraded in terms of all types of digital skills, especially managing data. That has been very encouraging. And so the next step for us is really looking at how to help people manage their own data in a in a very privacy controlled manner, but also know how to work with data in whatever field they work in a way that's very very mindful of the privacy and the impact of personal data. So I guess from that perspective, I am really looking forward to today's discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lisa.
So good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. My name is Lisa Salud, and it's my great pleasure to join you here from Luxembourg, the other fintech capital of the world, while our Singapore Fintech Festival is going live. I'm here building the smart city of Luxembourg in collaboration with the Ministry of Economy, both on the diagnostics and digital healthcare side, but also on the cybersecurity, quantum computing, and high performance computing ecosystem. I have many different hats, as many of you may know. Primarily, I'm the general partner of R3i Ventures, which is an integrated venture capital firm based out of Singapore, Luxembourg, and Silicon Valley. I'm also a partner of She Loves Tech in Korea and Japan, and I have the great privilege of having been an adjunct faculty member of Singapore Management University, teaching digital risk transformation and cyber risk governance at the MBA, EMBA, Executive Education, Civil Service College, and Institute of Directors levels. So I believe that I have almost educated the majority of Southeast Asia, and I have the great privilege to play a specific role in reputation risk management and helping people to understand through partnering with great people like Yusan, people's legal and regulatory license to operate. But I've really specialized on understanding people's social license to grow and innovate. So delighted to be with you here today.
Thank you so much. So just with that, Yusan, let me start the first question with you. With your background in IP and corporate and commercial law, how do you see the definition of social contract changing while we see a lot of people adapting new digital business models?
Thank you for that question. I like the term social contract because it implies that there is this agreement between the different stakeholders in a society that says that we are willing to contribute to this. We are willing to give up certain things in exchange for something else, right? So for some benefit. And the idea is with a social contract that everybody wins. So whether it's business, whether it's the consumer, society itself, governments, all of these different stakeholders in society should gain from such a social contract. Now, very often, social contract is enforced by laws, right? So you have different levels legal force, right? So you have policies and guidelines, and these may be promulgated by various agencies. So, for example, the Monetary Authority of Singapore issues lots of guidelines, some of which are binding, some of which are sort of recommended that you should follow. Yeah, and then it sets some form of standards. And if you fall below those standards, then there may or may not be any kind of sort of enforcement action, right? So with policy and guidelines, usually there isn't, but there are usually some form of consequences. And of course, you have then the hard law and regulations. In the area of data privacy would be the Personal Data Protection Act of Singapore. This is very similar to a lot of legislation worldwide, including the GDPR and various privacy laws and acts all over the world. Still the question is this: is there actually a social contract? And if some players, right, who are supposed to be perhaps in a more powerful position in this social contract, yeah, if they break the rules, are there remedies? Is there a way for you to say, no, then in that case, I withdraw my consent to this contract, right? So I think to date, we've seen a lot of legislation, the PDPA, the GDPR, what we've mentioned, but we've not yet come to the point where individual actors, data subjects, basically, individuals, safeguarding their personal data, able to actually on their own exercise certain remedies. Yeah. We are beginning to see some of this that is put into the law, things like, the requirement for getting consent and the ability, I think, to withdraw consent for certain things. So you can't just take consent once and for all, and then all your data is available forever. Yeah. So now we are beginning to see some laws that allow the consumer to take back some control. But what I think in the future that we would need to see more of is the ability for consumers themselves to take control over their own personal data and allow sharing of that data on a more granular level. Of course, backed up by laws in case people still don't follow the rules, and you still have the force of law behind it, but you have effective control. I think that's something that if that becomes a reality, then you will really see the social contract being much stronger and much more resilient and able to benefit, I think, more people.
Oh, thank you so much. And, that is really important. There are guidelines and there are laws. It's how do you marry the two together? So, coming to you, Lisa, you help startups, from the very start. And, you're helping them build the companies of tomorrow. How do you see, from your experience, the founder's journey of dealing with consumer data, just not from the sourcing point, but, how do they use, how are they storing it? And do you see that there is a bit of a lack, or is there good enough support for them to understand the whole piracy and privacy issues or the ethics issues? Because as a founder, you're looking at so many things, and then you go and look into policies and understanding that sometimes can be quite complicated. So what's your experience been around that?
Look, in Asia, the average time to detection in cybersecurity is 320 days. There's a reason for that, right? The reality is they're not. They have very limited or immature knowledge of these segments. They're there to solve a specific problem, whatever the purpose is for their business. And data protection and privacy and even cybersecurity has always been an afterthought, right? Because basically, they're just trying to get to MVP, minimum viable product. They haven't even had the capacity and probably even the resources to think about cybersecurity. And so you're seeing players move into the ecosystem to provide silver bullets of compliance. Yusan and I had the great privilege to be on a panel with a company called Detexion, who's just landed at the Singapore FinTech Festival. And they provide almost compliance in a box for companies that are built on the back of cloud software services, or any kind of SaaS software service is probably a more accurate prescription. And even we've purchased that service, right? Because at the end of the day, as a small business, we are always going to be the weakest link for one of our clients, a multinational corporation, because we just don't have teams of technology people or data experts sitting around waiting to look after the life cycle risk management of our companies. And you can now do that pretty cost effectively, particularly as regulations have come in to punish us for not being compliant. And so I'm really excited by the new players in the market who are literally transforming our lives through providing us with custom-built compliance in a box solutions that give us some level of a safety posture.
Where do you see, those could be very regional governed. So how do you see that in the global context, and especially when the startups are sort of scaling up?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, right? Because I'm sitting here in Europe, and it's really fascinating that they really want independence from the American and the Chinese cloud vendors. And so they're sitting here producing their own cloud infrastructure so that they cannot be reliant on the big players, right? And that in itself creates its own challenges. One's around sovereignty of data. Many of these cloud data centers in particular, they get economies of scale through backing up across borders, leveraging other infrastructure in other time zones, leveraging customer service support around the sun, right, around the clock. And you can't do that if suddenly you've got data sovereignty and it all has to be in one location. So I do think it gets even more complex as you go across border, and we're a cross-border venture firm, both in terms of our management consulting advisory ecosystem business, as well as the venture capital business. The more global you become, the more complex it becomes, the more expensive it becomes, is my experience. I wish it wasn't like that. But what we are having to do is to re-architect our organizations on a regional basis in order to be able to be compliant. Because trying to be compliant through one entity globally is really complex. And just take it very simply, just at a HR level, right, around data privacy and data protection. If I was to employ every single one of my employees in a standard employment contract in every country where I hire them, I literally wouldn't be compliant on a monthly basis, right? There's always some law changing. Small businesses just can't afford that overhead. And so quite often we move to contractual based relationships in order to accommodate the complexity. And we force the ownership of being compliant back to the individuals that live within those ecosystems. And generally you pay a premium for having that person on a contract, hoping that that actually covers their ability to be compliant. But I do think that Yusan will have some strong views on this topic.
Cool. Thank you. Quinn, you work with a lot of corporations in around their digital transformation. So you're probably seeing how they're using data to enhance their customer experience. In your experience, how are businesses navigating the thin line between utilizing the data for profit and then, for the good of the consumer? What is it that you're seeing? I'm really interested to see when they see all that data, especially big organizations. It's easy to use it for profit to know where should the stocks be and things like that. But then there's a whole tech for good aspect of it. So what's your experience been around that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a huge question. So let's see how much time do we have. But I think the short answer is yes, we work with a range of organizations in different industries, and because of the nature of our technology, which is helping organizations to actually integrate their data across different channels and build a single view of the consumer across those channels, imagining that, when you interact with any services or any service provider, any brands, anything that you buy, you engage with, it's no longer just a company and a website. It's a company, a website, a mobile app, social media. So all of these different places is where we as a consumer are actually leaving the traces of who we are, what we like, what we give consent to, knowingly or not, right? And we as a consumer, we don't think of it that way. I'm thinking that I'm interacting with brand A and that's it. I'm not thinking that, I'm leaving my data on their website. I'm also interacting with someone on customer service. So what we help the customer with, and that would be step one for organizations that recognizes this need to balance, that is first and foremost data consolidation. So you, in the first place, interact with consumers as they are, not as an ID that is coming to the website, or not as a mobile number, or not as an app number that's coming through the app, right? So first of all, it's building that single view of the consumer. And from there, centralize the way that we manage consent, manage their data. So starting with very clear, transparent consent process. And Yusan, what you mentioned earlier, that really struck a chord with me, which is that the social contract implies that there's consent, right? There's a choice, and that is you can give consent as a consumer, and you can also withdraw that consent. So on our side, the other side of the spectrum is, how do we ensure that we respect this? Because what we are doing is building trust with the consumers, right? So with that centralized database and the way that they manage, our customers manage their consumer data in a centralized way, then we can go to the next step, which is with the data and information that we have, what can we do with that? And then the next question is, right now, especially in the marketing, digital advertising space, in particular, and for basically any digital services in general, there's this huge trend of the rejection of third-party data, third-party tracking, meaning that anything that's follow you around the web, trying to understand your consumer behavior and building this very deep insight about yourself without you ever giving permission. That was something of the past, and a lot of browsers, a lot of the digital service provider are rejecting that. So what we are helping our clients to do is to start building first-party data repository. And what that means is data that that we collect with our own infrastructure, with us giving our clients, our consumers, exactly the transparency that they need to understand how the data is going to be built, and not sharing that with any other third party. So fully within permission. And with that, that also gives us the possibility of actually hosting that in any location. Again, you are giving your consumers the choice and giving these organizations the ability to fully comply with whatever laws, regulations, or requirements that they need to comply to. So there's definitely several layers to it, and it's not a half a year project, is multiple years, and that's just the technology layers, right? And then there's a lot more around education and digital literacy education for our own staff member as well as our clients to understand and to constantly uphold that. So that's again another journey altogether.
Yeah. No, I mean, totally agree with you on that, and especially very interested in, hearing about the rejection of third-party data. And it's a bold step, right? Because it's very easy to give that away. But coming to you, Yusan, you also mentioned something around, more control over personal data. In the Southeast Asia context, we're dealing with very different consumers. What's your experience been in how are the businesses trying to educate their consumers around the way they're using their data? And then how do you go about getting that consent? Because, a lot of people may not understand that they're giving a consent to because they're just very quickly saying yes, yes, yes. Nobody reads those terms and conditions, right? You normally tend to take it and go away. So what's your experience been around that?
I think I can speak for a lot of businesses, even in Singapore, which probably would be the most sophisticated market where people are aware of personal data and protection around that. And I can tell you that for most businesses, the sort of attitude towards it is compliance. They're not really looking at data ethics or informing their customers as a sort of differentiation, right? To say that, yeah, we are actually better for you because we treat your data with respect. I think at this point, it's the industry still kind of playing catch, especially the smaller companies. And I agree completely with Lisa. A lot of the companies that are collecting data are startups, and they don't have the ability, they don't have the big compliance departments and so that's their main challenge, to be honest. I mean, I have a law firm, and we have problems, right? We have very, very sensitive information. Much of that information isn't personal data as such. It's actually business information. But the need for the ability to control access to it, to protect it, I mean, that's a challenge for every business. So I think at this point, I don't think businesses have progressed to the point where they are actually advertising the advantages of working with them because they treat data in a special way. However, I am seeing some interesting companies in the fintech space actually providing some solutions. And I think Lisa's mentioned Detexion that's working from the business side of things. I know some companies are working from the consumer space, giving consumers the ability to encrypt their own data and then provide access to that data in a very selective basis, and it's very clear how they are rewarded for sharing that data. I think we're beginning to see some new companies, new technologies that are making that available. I think that's an important part of the ecosystem as well. I think once you have people being able to make these exchanges, that you're not just given a free service and then your data is being monetized, I think then you will have a lot more, I think, opportunities for businesses to be able to explain. So I think one of the problems is not just that they don't explain, they do. I mean, they're required by law to do it. So we write these long policies for them to say that this is what we do and all of these things. And after the long series of explanations, then you say, click here, I agree. and that's it, right? So they have sort of, the consumer has had to sort of swallow everything wholesale, right? Otherwise, they're not given access to the service, right? So I think that's it's not that they don't explain, it's the ability to do something about that information. If I don't have a choice, I need the service, and I can't say no to anything, I won't be reading. I wouldn't care, because I'm like, yeah, I know you're gonna monetize my data. I don't care. I'm just going to, I need your service, right? So that's not a real exchange. That's not a real, going back to the idea of a social contract, it's not really a social contract. That's not real consent. Yeah.
That brings to a really good point, right? Lisa, sorry, you wanted to say something.
No, I was just going to say, when it comes to the management of data, we really are in the business of trust and safety, right? That's inherently what we're selling on this social contract, is that you can trust me and that I will keep your data safe. The challenge is there are two things that pull the trust and safety layers apart. One of those is an opportunity lens, and one of those is a risk lens. On the risk lens, it is the ethics and values of this organization. That is who they say they are and how they operate, and actually how they really do operate and who we perceive them to be. And that disconnect or that dissonance is really the reputation risk in the company between who they say they are, their brand and identity, and how we perceive them, their image and their reputation. And on the other side, there's this opportunity side. So we have this social license to grow and innovate, introduce new products, new industry, new categories. And unfortunately, the one thing that pulls that apart is stakeholder communications. So if you are very poor at connecting, engaging, and explaining how you, first of all, who you are and how you operate, and then any breaches of that in the mind of the customer, those are the two things that are going to pull you apart as an organization and literally put you out of business. And so one of the things that founders generally get a leave pass on at the beginning is that it's not going to be perfect, right? Until they don't. I know when you go into Chrome, right, you check your passwords to say, how insecure am I? And, you know, in the first time that you did it, you had 5 companies that put your data all over the dark web, and you had to pay some service provider to clean it up. And then all of a sudden, the next week you check and there's another 30 breaches. And then the next week you check and there's another 60 breaches. And all of a sudden you've got like 130 breaches of your personal and private data on the dark web. And what do you do as a consumer, right? Because you entrusted your information to this third-party organization. And this is where I think it really becomes complicated, because if you steal my private data and you use it for a nefarious act, whatever that may be, it's very difficult to protect myself. At least in Singapore, I can report it to the police and it's registered on the police report, and I have some layer of protection. In Europe, I can report it to one of the credit bureau providers who can instantly freeze my credit so that nobody can access my services. I can't actually do that in Singapore. I taught a breach of the hospital and healthcare ecosystem as part of my cyber war games. And unfortunately, we had that event happen. And of all people, I had my personal data exposed. And I couldn't do anything. I could lodge a police report. We did that very efficiently, thanks to the Singapore government. But I couldn't contact the credit bureaus and freeze my credit. So, you know, there's very little risk mitigation that is available to the consumer. And I would ask you, Quinn, given the work that you do with corporates particularly, what safeguards do you deliver to the consumer? And I'll just ask you the question. Many years ago, I did the digital risk transformation of one of the largest insurers in the world across 60 different jurisdictions. And I did a very simple analysis of takedown notices on the social platforms. And at that time, there wasn't actually takedown processes in place with some of those actors. And even today, I couldn't access the legal team of one of those actors in order to get my information taken down. And I'll share a particularly scary corporate context, which could happen to any one of us. Let's just say that, unfortunately, I have to let UPMA go. Times are tough. We're not making the revenue. Our customer hasn't paid this quarter, and I literally can't afford to keep UPMA employed anymore. And UPMA is devastated. So she decides to put the link to our corporate server, public facing, on her Facebook site. How do I get that down, and how fast can I get it down? Now, the reality is I just have to assume it's exposed and it's public, right? And anything on there, we need to mitigate. Unfortunately, that could happen to any one of us at any time, at any moment. And the safeguards are just not in place. Quinn, what are you doing with your corporates to protect consumers against those types of acts?
Absolutely. Thank you for the great question. Indeed, this is something that I have to say that most organizations don't think so much about it until we hear something super serious in the news, or until we become the victim, which is unfortunate. So definitely for us in the business of helping people manage their data, helping organizations to set up their infrastructure, it's always an kind of an education process together with whatever service that we are providing to the organization. I would say again to really look at mitigation in the first place, I think it's really about understanding how it is that these kind of problems occur. And usually in the context of larger organizations, we usually see that as the result of siloed operations, where we have the IT obviously having the strictest level of security requirement for, let's say, for all types of service provider, for your website, for every single avenues where you are collecting your customer data and hosting that. And then we have different types of departments, and especially with marketing or any innovation related kind of departments, there's always the double-edged sword, where because they are moving so fast and their technology in their field moves so fast, there's this excitement of let's try this, let's and with a good heart, right? We are trying new services, new technology that can help us to be more efficient, to create new values for our customers. But at the same time, we are forgetting that whatever that we are onboarding so fast and with so much excitement usually means that there's not enough kind of safeguard in place. So for us, it's always about, again, going back to building kind of a centralized system and single view of the consumer, so that so that is always managed centrally, because we can't reasonably expect. We should, but we can't expect that let's say the marketing person who is tasked to run X number of marketing campaigns per month would actually go through and check, do we have everything? Do all of these mailing lists have the customers who, strictly speaking, have given us consent for all types of marketing communication, right? Have we taken into consideration that we have consumers who has withdrawn their permission for contact in other channels, and we simply just have not connected that, right? So it's about enabling them to do this even without as systematically as possible, so without having to do it as an extra process, extra step in the process. So that's already the better half won. I think the other part is as well, this is a little bit more general solution, but really about looking at how diverse are the teams when they are coming up with these kind of solutions when it comes to, the digital transformation, the teams that's working with customer data, how diverse is the team, so that it's not purely consist of software engineers whose sole concern is to write a clean code, but also to have people who have different kinds of backgrounds who would be considering these sort of unintended consequences of your push for growth and your services. So those are a few ways. Yeah.
Fantastic. I mean, that's a really good point around, having diverse teams, because, diverse teams give you that point of view from different perspectives. All of you've been talking a lot around compliance and, we're doing everything that is compliant. And that brings me to the point where, in your experience, you all work with different businesses, but you also work with different governments, right? And most of the policies are set by governments. Where are you seeing the inter-exchanging of these ideas of, that's defining these data policies? What is it missing between the two? Are the businesses talking enough to the government? Is the government taking in enough consideration of what the small businesses need? Do they fully understand the speed of innovation? When you mentioned that, some of the companies are moving way too faster than the policies are coming out. So, it's open to all three of you. I'm really interested to see your experience with governments around the data policies around innovation.
I'm Twisted Cynical founder, so you should ask me last, I think. You should speak first, Yusan. You've got the most optimistic view of all of us.
I'm not sure that I am optimistic. I am a lawyer after all. Yes, the existence of the law predicates on the fact that human nature requires a sanction to play by the rules. Yeah. So, but I think, so it's a big question. It's a multifaceted. So the communication between businesses and government I think where Asia is concerned, I think the government is really in the lead, right? A lot of businesses aren't really thinking about data, whether it's ethically sourced, whether they are treating data correctly. They're looking at just compliance. They want to get along. They just want to get on with business. I think that would be my take on most the attitude of most businesses to this. So I think it's still government taking the lead. Then the question is why do that? And the reason is that I think with a lot of personal data protection laws, there is a provision that says that you cannot transmit personal data into a jurisdiction or to an organization outside of the country unless you ensure that they treat the personal data to the same level of protection that you enjoy in the country. Yeah. And so because of that, I think businesses, particularly in Singapore, where we want to be a data center, for example, we want to be a financial hub and so forth. So we want to make it easy for compliance. That is, people are able to say from outside of Singapore to say that, yes, we can transfer information to Singapore because their laws have a high standard. So I think that's where I think a lot of the privacy laws are being driven. Right? But then you also have situations like in China where the main objective is really to make sure that no external companies or even internal companies can come into China, take a lot of personal data and then abuse it. Mm-hmm. So that's also another motivation for a lot of Asian countries as well. So again, it's the government really taking the lead. I think you will have a lot more to come from the private sector when you're able to actually have a fair exchange of personal data for certain benefits or services or goods. Yeah, and when you have that, then there is a greater incentive for businesses. I mean, they are after all profit-making organizations. And most of our personal data today is being collected by for-profit companies. But what's worrying is that they're giving us something free in exchange, a service, whether it's search or social media or whatever. And in exchange for that, they are collecting our data very often without our explicit knowledge or consent, right? So that's the problem right now, because the avenues for exchange are very limited. You don't see as much the private sector really taking the lead because they don't have a profit motive. That's sort of part of the whole data protection framework.
Yeah, I could just add, I actually think Singapore has been particularly supportive and enabling to the ecosystem. You know, these government sandboxes go such a long way in helping to get us on board and to reduce the cost of, or to reduce the barriers to entry, right? Because ultimately these are barriers to entry for companies. And so in order to foster greater innovation into the ecosystem, assuming that 1 in 300,000 startups are going to be successful, right? You need to have a lot of players in the ecosystem. So I am a big champion of the Singapore government, because I do think that, unlike other governments in the world that have kind of just let the market play it out and to see who wins and who fails, Singapore have given grants to enable us to get up to speed. We've got skills credits that enable us to educate our teams. You know, there's a lot of capacity and capability building that comes in at the grassroots level. But I do think that has also been disabling, just to show the other side of the coin. And it creates corporate zombies in the ecosystem. Corporate zombies are organizations, because we are quite a risk-averse nation, that are so focused on being compliant that we've forgotten what it takes to be innovative and inventive. And so we get kind of lost in this mire of regulatory oversight. And as a fintech, where speed to market is fundamental to taking, it's in a platform economy, it's winner takes all, right? You've got to run, and you've got to run as fast as you possibly can. And if you're sat there looking at your navel, working out your takedown policies, you're in big trouble. So we have had some great advice from Mike Love, who was the former chairman of Burster Marcella. He was the former head of communications of McDonald's during the Mad Cow crisis, BT during the net neutrality wars. I mean, this guy has seen every corporate impossibility you've ever seen, as well as being the advisor to Margaret Thatcher. And he taught us something very simple. And he says, Lisa, if you're operating on the frontiers of the bleeding edge, just remember your leads. Is it L, legal, both by the spirit and the letter of the law, if you can afford your lawyer? Is it E, ethical? That is, it's based on the country that you're operating in. Does it conform with local ethics? And the proxy for going global is, does it conform to international standards? And then, is it A, acceptable based on those stakeholders who matter most? And generally speaking, that's legal and regulatory first. So those matters generally come into the fore. And then, is it defendable? So if it's on the front page of the Straits Times, can you defend it? And then finally, very pragmatically, because, you know, our mission is to run as fast as we can and take as much of the market, simply, is it sensible? Because sometimes it is legal, it is ethical, it is acceptable, it is defendable, but it simply is not sensible. And then we put on 2 globally responsible leadership questions. And coming back to that brand and identity piece, does this decision that we're about to make, does it change who we are as a company? Thinking about our social contract, our values in this organization. And secondly, does the decision that we're about to take change who I am as a person? Once again, that values alignment. And I think this is a very, very simple lens that we apply to the world, running as fast as we can to the market.
It's a very good lens, I would say. Quinn, do you want to have a quick go at it?
I'm just, learning a lot as well from this discussion. And I think Yusan and Lisa have beautifully really laid it out, the role of the government at the very meta level of enabling businesses. So I agreed with that. And I think I would just add on another layer of that, which is that with the government, there's also another layer of education and enabling or, empowering the individual consumers, right? So, and us individual as consumers, but also as participants of the digital economy, are we aware of the value exchange that's happening here? Are we aware that when we participate in any services that is provided for free, then we become the product essentially? So at that level, education system nowadays is catching up with with STEM education, with the requirement of of innovation and technical requirements. So there's a lot of courses around data science, around software engineering. So no doubt, the number of people with a hard skill is being supported, especially with Singapore government, is being supported to increase. But are we adding a layer of ethical education, asking are there courses, or is part of the curriculum really including things like what is ethics and how to think about of a fair market economy, or even critical thinking, right? These things is more important, because our engineers are trained how to write beautiful codes and solve solution very elegantly with technology, but are they stopping to think, is that the solution I should be creating in the first place? Is that the right solution? And then with that, we come back to the piece of diversity, right? Are we opening access through education and through other means, opening access to people from minority group, people who are differently abled, so that the solution, the innovation that the private sector is coming up with is serving the entire society as a whole. And that is something that I think government has a big role to come in and to kind of lay out the foundation for that.
Yeah, I love what you said about critical thinking and ethics. And I have to chime in because they're the two subjects I teach at Singapore Management University. So I'm a little bit biased. But it's really interesting. I recently did a discussion on the lack of cybersecurity skills in the ecosystem, right? Because we have this huge burden of cyber attacks, but we just don't have the talent pool to meet the demands. And what's fascinating is when you think about the skill sets that you need, only 1/3 of them are technical. The other 2/3 are about problem solving, creativity, communications, stakeholder engagement, all the wonderful skills that you could take from someone almost operating in any industry that could be applied to cybersecurity. And a fascinating point for everybody in Singapore is that cybersecurity has an industry-wide happiness level of engagement of 77% and are mostly the highest paid in their industry. So if you ever wanted to be in a better space, being in the RegTech and compliance space at this moment is really a great market opportunity.
Cool. Thank you. And, Quinn, to your point, I know She Loves Data has been doing a fabulous job around educating. And, you need to educate, especially in this part of the world. Digital education is so important. We've just got about 8 to 9 minutes left. I do have a couple of questions that's come through to us. So I'll put that out. How has the pandemic changed the way people or companies are now using consumer data? And why is it more important now to regulate it? Quinn, Yusan, Lisa, anybody? Quinn, you work with a lot of corporates.
Absolutely. I'll just kickstart that. So how has the pandemic changed the way people use consumer data? Okay, first of all, I have to put it out there that I am worried because remember how basically every company is in the kind of March to June last year was basically scrambling to get all their services, to digitalize as much as possible, adapt to people working from home. And as we know, with the speed of that being done and with the skill of that being done at all companies at all levels, no doubt there were, certain protocols and data privacy protocol that was not in place. Even like for us, I've seen for us as a company that has always been fully remote, I have seen the level of work that goes into making sure that the way that remote workers are working with customer data, how you set up all the privacy layers, remote access. It takes a lot of effort and planning and thinking that goes into it. So for something that is adopted so quickly, no doubt there's going to be a lot of things that a lot of companies need to now come back to really review. Did we do the right thing? Did we put all the check and balances in place, right? So that's first and foremost, I think something that needs to be done. Why is the way that consumer data is used now is more important? I think purely is just because of awareness, right? Consumers now are more aware that there is another way, that I don't have to be a giving my data for free for some free services. I can afford, if there is an option that is given to me to pay some money to have premium services in which my data is not going to be monetized. I'm only going to be served the kind of content and services that is appropriate for me and I ask for. I would absolutely go for that choice, right? So it's just from the perspective of consumer data privacy, awareness, and people being aware that their privacy, their data, the insight about who they are as a consumer is worth something, which is, we've never thought of it that way. We've never thought of, well, the understanding of my own behavior is worth $1 or an X amount of dollar to some company. And now that I'm aware of it, I am making a conscious choice of, do I want to pay for it, or do I want to get it for free and get someone else to monetize me for it? And just from that perspective, consumers are demanding for it, and therefore the private sectors are responding to that.
Anything to add, Lisa and Yusun, before I move to the next one?
I just want to say, from a digital health perspective, we've never wanted our data more, right? Just as a very simple example, in the heat of the crisis, I moved from Singapore to Luxembourg. We literally hadn't seen our family in 3 years, and they're very old, and that became really important to us. And I have to show my vaccination certificate. I need to show my children's vaccinations from school. And of course, Singapore keeps that beautifully held on digital platforms that aren't necessarily always accessible in a foreign country unless you're digitally connected to the internet. And not everybody is as digitally connected as Singapore is. And so we ran into trouble where we literally couldn't go into a restaurant, or we couldn't put our child in school that day because we didn't have digital connectivity to have access. And so this was really interesting for us to go from being completely connected to being completely disconnected. So I think that's something, when you talk about inclusivity, Quinn, that's something that we really need to think about. And the second thing is during the crisis, our use of platforms proliferated so greatly. My team just got tired of me every week introducing a new platform. And what I failed to forget is that people were going through some really traumatic times during this crisis. One of my team members had a drive-by shooting on her doorstep 2 minutes before a team meeting. Still attended because she was in, fight or flight mode. And so the best thing is to just sit down and sit in that team meeting, even though there's, a policeman sitting on your front doorstep. We had people who were unvaccinated turn up at vaccinated people's residences because, you used to drop in and see your workmate, but now you can't do that because you don't share the same beliefs about vaccination. We had people who had had COVID and then who have had long COVID. And long COVID means that we have some level of, cognitive decline post-hospitalization. And we've actually had to implement new policies and new systems in order to make life easier for everyone. Because normally in everyday times, we're operating from, the logic brain, and we can think critically and with great rationale. But when we're in a situation of great crisis, the first thing is we don't hear, number one. So we literally functionally can't physically listen. And then second is we're operating from the reptilian brain, the frontal lobe. So we're definitely not hearing anything. and really engaging effectively on the topics of regulation or compliance is very, very challenging. And so we really had to break things down into bite-sized pieces and to completely simplify the level of overhead that would go on a simple task or an individual in order to be able to effectively operate from home.
So just very quickly, we've got 2 minutes left, and I'll go through all of you on this one. What is the best resource for founders to define their digital policies and data protection protocols? Just very quickly, give them something to start with.
Well, I'm going to say call Yusan and Audrey. That's my
Thank
default position.
Thank you. But I think the Personal Data Protection Commission, the PDPC, actually has very, very good resources there. So I would advise everyone who's concerned about it to please use the resources there. It's very user-friendly. At least understand what are the things that you have to do before you go to a professional that can actually then draft your policies for you, educate your people, and help you to have the relevant consent forms and things like that. I think the PDPC website is really useful for that.
Thank you. Quinn?
Nothing to add. I would say that is the first thing to start, right? Because as we talk about compliance, that's the first level that organizations should be looking at, and pretty comprehensive. So I would agree that's definitely the first place.
Yeah, and I guess some of the courses that She Loves Data is running is quite useful for the founders. So please do check them out.
Thank you for the call out.
No, you guys are doing a fabulous job. So, so thank you so much. This has been such an interesting conversation. There's so much to take away, and I kind of feel a second conversation coming out of this very soon. So let's continue the conversation. And thank you everybody for joining us today. We would take this and please feel free to give us some feedback, as you can see very nicely prompted over here. But if you have any more questions, if you want to have a bigger conversation, please reach out to us. This is just the start of the conversation of how do we really redefine the social contract, and especially very, very interested for how do we empower our founders who are creating the companies of tomorrow to do the right thing. Not all of us can afford very sophisticated lawyers. So we would direct them to Yusan to support them. But no, thank you everyone for joining us, and let's continue the conversation. Please feel free to send us the feedback. Yusan, Quinn, Lisa, thank you ever so much for spending the time.
Thank you.
Thanks
for having me.